Okay, Velina me ke aloha. So let's start our lectures on Hawaiian cosmogonies, and we're going to start by looking at Hemele Kumulipo first and rolling into some of the other cosmogonies. So this is part one. And the big thing to remember as we look at these cosmogonies is to understand what a cosmogony is, and we'll talk more about that to really understand. But it really sets the foundation to understand the ideologies, philosophies, culture, morals, the way that people may see themselves, understand themselves, and relate to themselves in this so-called world and cosmos, and hence the word cosmogony. So, in the Hawaiian context, when you talk about Hawaiian culture, to really understand the Hawaiian culture, you really need to understand, of course, Hawaiian cosmogony. And so, the title, yeah, no kaaina ana ameke kumumua o ko Hawaii nei kanaka. He mo'ali'i no kalahui kanaka. Pertaining to the coming of land, yeah, the making of land, and the beginning, the origination of Hawaii's people, yeah, and a genealogical history of the Hawaiian people. And yeah, so let's kind of move on real quickly. And so, taking again from the words of the great Papa Mau Piailu, who I think, leads us in his understand to understand, to navigate, you must be brave. Yeah, to be brave, you must remember. And so the idea of remembering, the importance of remembering, the importance of what remembering does, how it gives us this kind of knowledge, gives us courage to have the faith, really, yeah, to have the faith. If I have faith and courage, it's because I remember the teachings of my so-called ancestors. So this deep cultural knowledge is really what guides us, yeah, to inform us on our pathway, in fact, to give us the skills, the knowledge, the tenacity, the resilience to go anywhere in this world. And starting off with the great words of Joseph Moku Ohai Poi Poi, who in 1906, in writing for Kanaiaupuni, a daily newspaper, one of probably the most greatest writers, not just of his time, but probably the most prolific Hawaiian writer, who at this moment was writing three or four different articles, an article about Kamehameha and Hi'iaka, and at the same time he starts this series on ancient Hawaiian history, Mo'olelo Hawaii Kahiko. But as he says in 1906, I will share this story, but for me, it really changed my way in which I looked at our ancient stories and histories and songs and poetries and so forth. As you said, let it be known, that we are a people with our own ancient stories and histories. That's kind of like the ancient people of Hellene, yeah, the ancient Greeks. Yeah, so it's comparison, of course, to Greek history and culture. Greek is kind of held up as being the classical core or beginnings of what becomes the philosophies, mathematics, histories, literature of European, yeah, coming out of so-called uh, the Greece. And so, he's comparing to Greece, but he says, their stuff, they have good stuff, but our stuff is not just as good, but even better. And, as he says, you know, with those words, it really portrayed that, when we think about our ancient knowledges, our ancient songs, our cosmogonies, our histories, our deep cultural knowledge, that he already is saying that, it's not just as good as what the Greeks have in regards to this kind of classic ideas, but the fact that our stuff is just as good, in fact, if not even better. Yeah. And answer the question: where do we come from? Where do we belong? Who are we? Where did we originate from? Yeah, and so this is an example where the Kumulipo was performed actually several times, and actually twice for Captain Cook when he arrived. So you can see maybe on one, perhaps Native Hawaiians are explaining who we are in this through this mele, through this song, this poetry, genealogy, and at the same time probably trying to incorporate who Captain Cook may be in this great genealogy. History is a people's memory. Without a memory, man is demoted to the lower animals. And so the importance of understanding history, again, the point of all people's understanding the history is really the cornerstone to our own humanization, our own process to becoming humans, yeah, to be not thought of and kept or treated as if lower animals, lower species of human beings. Yeah, so this really tells you the more we understand, the more we promote, teach, educate ourselves about our own histories and culture, the more we humanize ourselves, yeah, to be higher so-called creatures. So, what is a cosmogony? Well, it's an account, it's a story, but it's a story that really speaks to the origin of the universe. How does everything come to being? And the word cosmos, yeah, cosmos, like the universe, and gonos, which is the word for generation, like genealogy. So it's really a cosmogony, is a story. It's a genealogy of the cosmos, how everything comes to being, of course, which ends with the humans. Applied to mythic accounts given of the origin current among the peoples of antiquity, ancient times, and modern races. So again, it's mythological. It tells a story. It's an account of how everything comes into being. Now, it's a little different from cosmology. Cosmology is really a scientific inquiry and study. Yeah, when you actually use science to explain the story. So cosmogony is not necessarily scientific. It may have scientific principles like the Kumulipo, but it's really a story. It's a mythology. But it's through this mythology that you help to shape who our people are. Yeah, and so forth. Yeah. And as Kwame Ture says, power to define is the most important power we have. Yeah, being able to tell your story, to be able to define who you are, and as we'll see in some of the words and vocabs, yeah, it's really to detail your own. Defining yourself is the most important element to define who you are, to who you can become, what you need to do, and so forth. And so this narrative, yeah, what is a narrative? Narrative is like this story that kind of links up all these events. It's a background story that kind of, you know, makes sense. It tries to tell a particular narrative again. So the narrative, it plays a huge role. It's not just telling what happened in the story, but it's you trying to string up these ideas to make sense. Yeah. So you think about a good narrative would be take things like from the United States, right? The idea of land of the home of the free and the brave, or the idea of manifest destiny. Yeah, it's God's chosen plan, it's providence, and so it's the story behind the story. Yeah, that tries to give. And again, the thing with the narrative, it's not necessarily meant to be true. It's not necessarily meant to be provable, but it's a way to guide. It gives people a kind of sense of purpose. So, what do narratives do? Yeah, what do cosmogonies do? What does language do? Well, of course, we would know that if you were to compare two worldviews, we can look at words like aina. And the word aina in Hawaiian sense comes from the Polynesian concept of kainga. Yeah, kainga with a K. And you hear that sound. Yeah. And so kainga, for example, is a Polynesian or Proto-Polynesian word for family. So the root word of aina, as we talk about how aina, that which feeds us, the land we live upon, that's what gives us nourishment. Yeah, aina. Yeah. Aina comes from the word kainga, which means family. So you can see even etymology of the word and a meaning, and it makes sense. The idea that land, what we call land in English, in the Hawaiian sense, comes from this deeper Polynesian sense of it being familial, yeah, having a familiar relationship. Now, that's a very different concept from something like real estate or property or private property. In fact, I mean, real estate, the idea of what is real estate, that's a certain kind of story, right? Real estate, he says, it's a commodity. Land has a certain specific value in a capital system. Yeah, that land, what of land is about value. Yeah, some kind of commodification. It's a very different word from aina. Yeah. And so the point is just to understand that you have two different worldviews, two different ideas, two different narratives of what so-called, is it aina or is it real estate? Yeah. And so the worldview of who we are is shaped by these cosmogonies. Yeah. So if you think about the Hawaiian way today, why Hawaiians do the things that they do today, the importance of one culture, where does it all come from? This idea there's a worldview that's attached, how you behave, how you see yourself in this world. A worldview is a set of beliefs, values, assumptions that shape how a person or group perceives the world. Right. So if you think about a world where the land is aina, it's familial, while you see how you shape and see the world as being something that's familial. Yeah. It's the lens that makes sense of their experiences again. Yeah. And when we think about cosmogonies in the Hawaiian thing, we'll start off by looking, we have three general categories, is probably best to describe, of cosmogonies. And it's thing to remember, we don't have one cosmogony in Hawaii. You don't have one story. We have stories, mythologies. Now, why do we have many? Well, the important thing to remember is that when you think about so-called Hawaiian people prior to the coming of Captain Cook in 1778, we had many different migrations from the so-called Polynesian islands that had come at different times. And when they came, they brought their genealogies, their stories, their religions, and virtually all Pacific people ended up at some point in Hawaii. So with them, they brought these stories. And this is why in Hawaii, you have think of it having collection. And so I would say, think about the Hawaiian Cosmogonies with a plural, not cosmos plural, is that you have various times of settlements and colonizations, and with them bringing all these stories. And so this is why we don't just have one. Yeah, we have many, and very complicated also. The three common themes is that how does it begin? The first, it just begins. So the explanation is how does it all start? It just starts. How does the world create itself? It just creates itself. Yeah, it just becomes. The second is this kind of story as if that there is sexual reproduction, like the world. If everything creates itself in a kind of sexual manner, well, even the cosmos and the stars must have create, this kind of sexual way of creating the world, and things are birthed. Yeah, how now? And then third, that you think of the deities or deity or the creator or creators, depending on the story, that they actually create the world as a sense of a creation story. And those are the three common themes you see the categories for Hawaiian cosmogonies. And most of our stories, we're talking about Kauai Pa'aina. We're talking relations specific to these islands. But as we look at our cosmogonies, you're going to realize a lot of our cosmogonies are outside of Hawaii. Even prior to coming to Hawaii, these stories were brought here. And so the larger context, right, the islands is the Moana Nui, the large, what do you call the Pacific Ocean, Moana Nui, where our peoples are ocean peoples, island peoples. Therefore, the cosmogonies will be related very much to the ocean and movement of the ocean and migration and so forth. Obviously, just to get to these islands, yeah, Pacific peoples and Polynesians had to migrate there purposely. And so when we think about much of the cosmogonies, yeah, it's not just only about Hawaii. Yeah, a lot of the cosmology relates to the coming to even before reaching these islands. So when you come to Hemele Kumulipo, the title, Hemele, He is the in the indefinite article, which means or an, something that's non-specific. Mele is a song. Anything that has like poetry, yeah, is a mele. And Kumulipo is the name of this mele. Now, Hemele Kumulipo is the most famous. It is the most complex, grandiose of all the cosmogonies, the Hawaiian cosmogony. Really, it's kind of like I always say, think of it as the greatest hits album. Yeah, this is not the hit; it is the collection of hits. So kind of think of the Hemele Kumulipo in that way. And the name itself, Kumulipo, tells you a little bit about the ideas that come from how everything begins. That kumu, the word kumu means the beginning, the foundation, the source. Like the teacher is a source of knowledge. Yeah, kumuhula, the source of learning a dance. And the idea that this is where you things come from. The base of a tree is a kumu. Yeah, the beginning, the reason. And then the word lipo, which means dark, deep, deep dark, the darkness of darkness were void of all light. And so the idea of in the beginning it was deep darkness, or the idea of the deep darkness is the beginning. And so when you think about the Kumulipo, the name itself tells you how does it begin? It begins in the Kumulipo. Now, the Kumulipo is a song, in comparison to other so-called traditional cosmogonies that you find. For example, if you take the biblical essence, the Judeo-Christian sense of Genesis is the cosmogony. Yeah, talks about the world being created in 6 days, and then God took a rest on the seventh. That's a particular story. That's a cosmogony. Yeah, but as the great Professor Starbuck said, when you compare the Kumulipo with other cosmologies around the world, the Hawaiian Kumulipo is as complex and as fantastic and tremendous as you'll find in any so-called cosmogonies. Yeah, it kind of makes sense. Yeah, take something that's out of. It also has principles of evolution. Yeah, so it's not scientific in a sense, but it has scientific ideas and principles you can clearly see to make sense. Yeah, coherence out of chaos, and details how everything comes to these islands. Uluwale mai no kaina, the land, what makes it become? It becomes. And that's the idea of Kumlipo. What is the story of the source? It just is. It becomes. Yeah. Many times people like to compare it to things like the Big Bang. And what is the Big Bang? That it was singularity, unified, that everything began as one. And the one is still the one. So when you think about in the Hawaiian sense of the Big Bang is not an event that occurred. It's a very important concept. It's not something that happened, 10 billion years ago, perhaps. But the idea that it's still happening, that now that the if you think of creation, is ongoing. It is still going. It is happening, right? If you think about the sense of that the expansion of the universe, yeah, or the multiverse, yeah, the idea that this is something that's ongoing. Yeah, so when you think about it in Hawaiian sense, it's not that something was created, but the sense that we are being created, we are that which was created, and we are creators ourselves. That's a very important philosophy, that we become creators of creation itself. We are participants, not just those who was created, but in our actions of today, we directly make cause for the future. So it's not a linear sense. It's kind of been a cyclical sense of things occurring over and over and over. Yeah. Theory of evolution, it's very clear that the Hawaiians understood the principles of what becomes evolution. Yeah, from simple life form, it leads eventually to through natural selection process and changes that occur through the genetics, the DNA, because of the landscape, because of the tribulations and so forth. Then these so-called species of creatures will evolve. And Hawaii is, I mean, again, the thing to remember is Hawaii has the highest rate of endemism, endemic plants and animals in the world. Means we have more plants and animals that are only found here than in any parts of the world. That we have such a high rate of endemism, and again because of the landscape, and most importantly because of our location. We're as far away from any large islands as can be as possible, pretty much in the center of the Pacific. So any life forms that got here took a long, long time to get here, and very difficult process after being here. For example, like the birds, I think they say that you're talking about two or three original birds perhaps got here over millions of years, and from those birds were able to reproduce, and then changes to the environment, changes to the islands, the valleys, the fruits, and so forth. These life forms would then co-evolve. Yeah, so you think about the birds. Yeah, why is the beak shaped in that way? Well, because the flowers that they take nectar from evolved in the same way. Yeah, you look at the happy face spider again. This is a defense mechanism. So what you see in Hawaii is really unlike any other place in the world. It really makes Hawaii a very, very special place. I mean, we literally live in a very special. There's no place like Hawaii in the world. We have like pretty much all the landscapes. I think biospheres, everything except two. I think we don't have tundra, and I forget the other. But everything from wetland forest, dryland forest, we got deserts, we have the most wettest places on the earth to the most driest places, all relatively close. So the diversity of this landscape created a diverse biology. Yeah. So again, this is something that's very, very important. So you can really see and witness in Hawaii, yeah, those changes. And so why did Hawaiians become very keen in understanding evolution? Well, you can see evolution in the island. You can see the differences. And you can see the bird's beak, for example, that's the same shape as the flower. So you realize, hey, they co-evolve. It's really easy to see. It's a genealogy. It's a mo'oku auhau. It's a genealogy, not just of humanity, but it's a genealogy of all life forms, all the way, in fact, to the creation of life itself, all the way to the creation of the stars. Yeah, and in fact, humans are the youngest of this family. So, what is a genealogy? It's a pedigree, it's relationships, physical, it's DNA, and so forth. Yeah. It's song, it's poetry, first of all. It's not a textbook, it's not a scientific explanation, it's not a list of facts. It's a song, it's poetry, first of all. So, what is poetry? Yeah, again, poetry is analogies, it's metaphor, simile. I mean, you're using different ways to describe feelings and what you see and experiences in a very poetic way. Sometimes you have insider and outsider information that's provided, meaning we use the word kauna in Hawaiian, Kaona, kauna, which means there are multiple meanings, hidden meanings, occultish meanings may be in there also. It may be meanings of words, it may be sounds, it may be rhythms, it may be numerals, it might be numbers. All of these are contained in this fantastic creation. That is the Kumulipo. And finally, it's a prayer. It's a pule ho'ola'ali, that it was functionally used as a prayer at the birth of this child and at the death of Ali'i also. So it had many various functions, and that's the point. Over 2,000 lines long. Yeah, again, the idea of kauna, yeah, to remember in Hawaiian thinking, things are not seen as literal. Yeah, if I tell you a story, if I sing you a song, I quote you a line, or I give you a name, perhaps, it's not the literal that's important. It's always the sense of understanding that it's always has a deeper hidden meaning, that it might be alluding to something else. So very much Hawaiian literature is very built in a sense of having multiple interpretations. Things are never just clearly black and white. It's always gray in a sense. It's always meant to be interpreted. Yeah, the audience is always participatory. So, just philosophically, you can see we're not the same in the Holy World, for example, right? When you do religious texts, right, they fight over the literal meaning. This means A, B, and C, and exactly means A, B, and C, and you better believe it means A, B, and C. And even if you don't believe it means A, B, and C, I might have to hurt you, even kill you, and force you to believe it's A, B, and C. In the Hawaiian world, it's the total opposite. It's all right. It's understood that we're going to have differences of interpretation. That's part of the magic, in a sense. It's part of the brilliance. It's part of the beauty. That's the aesthetic. Yeah, that I may see, feel, think things differently than someone else. That is okay. Yeah, that we may have multiple understandings. That is okay. That's a very Hawaiian worldview. Yeah. In other words, it's not built into you better think the way I think or else. Yeah, we're not a monolithic people at all. Yeah. And the history of the Kumulipo, some things that we know it was chanted for Lono Ikamakahiki, that was his god name. His ali'i name, his name was Kalani Nui I Amamau. He was born in the early 1700s. He is the father of Kalani Opu'u. He would kind of be like the grandfatherish age of Kamehameha, in genealogical wise, just to set his time period. And when he was born, it said that this particular chant, Hemele Kumulipo, was performed for him, of course, to explain, well, who was this child? What makes this child special? It wasn't just this child's parents were special, but it goes back to his grandparents, goes back to the earliest humans, the coming of the humans, to the earliest life forms, all the way back to the stars themselves, to show the mana, yeah, the mana, this magical um, power and that we can actually non-material. Yeah, these are you want to talk about in this kind of spiritual sense, in a physical sense, but the idea of having this power, yeah, that is provided by this mele, this song. We know it's chanted for Captain Cook a couple of times when he came. It was also chanted for Ke'eaumoku, who is the father of Kahumanu upon his deathbed. So you can see function-wise, as a bird, meaning some other dignitary, I guess, and thirdly for the passing of an high-ranking ali. So again, function-wise, it was used for many different purposes. We know the first time it's put to written form was at Lahaina Luna with David Malo and Kamokuiki, and the first versions were very short, very abridged, very almost like an outline version of the Kumulipo, the basics of the Kumulipo. But that's the first time it was put down to written form. The first time it was translated, in fact, was into German. A guy named Bastian, working with Kalakaua, who comes here and is kind of fascinated, with some of the ideas that the Kumulipo promotes. Of course, ideas like evolution. And so even the idea of evolution had just become something that's widely popular in Europe. The Europeans through Darwin, right? Darwin was the first for European. Again, Darwin was the first in the world. He's the first European to kind of discover ideas of evolution. Hawaiians and other Pacific peoples already understood principles of evolution way before Darwin. But this German Bastian was the first to translate it. So the first language was translated German. And again, remember at that time in history, in the late 1800s, even into the early 1900s, the cornerstone, the corner of all scientific inquiry, mathematics was in places like Austria and Germany. Of course, this is where the great Albert Einstein himself comes from. The Kalakaua text was the first time it was printed, the whole printed and offered to the so-called general public. I think it was 1880, it's 1883. Sorry, I got it off the top of my brain. Anyway, the early 1880s, Kalakaua publishes the text. It's the first time it's kind of produced in this kind of mass way, kind of help to proclaim who he is as a person himself. The Kuikahi is another example of the text. We have the Kuluwai Maka version, who was a dancer then during that time of Kalakaua. And we also have the version that Lili'u Okalani would then translate into English for the first time. And Lili'u Okalani actually translate the Kumulipo while locked away at Iolani Palace after the overthrow. And they jailed her in her own palace. And one of the things that she would do was she started to translate the Kumulipo And so the little brown book you have on the side here, that's the book that's the Kalakaua version that's translated by Lili'u'o Kalani into English. Yeah. So a little background history of the Kumulipo. And some other things to kind of think about the Kumulipo. And then like this is also in your readings. Yeah, just gives a little background of Kumulipo, a couple of pages. Talks about who and history. I mean, just kind of what the same things I talked about. Make sure you take a look at that to get the basic background of the Kumulipo. A forward by Tipua Kanahele, just again, very basic short for it, but talks about why it's important. And she says in the very end here, the Kumulipo is the reality of our dim past, the foundation for our present, and the pathway into the future. It is the cognizant reminder of our ancestors, their intelligence, failure, conquest, and defeat. This song, again, song, is a gift which encourages the warrior within us to awaken the contests and challenges which constantly confront us by using intelligence and ancestral experiences. It is our genealogy connecting mankind to earth and sky. Yeah, again, this is the sense of who we are. And we have a genealogical, a familiar relationship with the world around us. Yeah. You are the Kumulipo. Know the esoteric soul inside of you and celebrate your Ponahakiola, yeah, circle of life. So, but what does it do, right? It gives us an idea what how do we see ourselves as Kanaka. Yeah, what did our traditional kupuna see who we were as human beings. Yeah, where what we how we sat in this world. Yeah, what are our purposes? Why are we here? What's our story as our people? Yeah, the idea of being familial. Yeah, that we are related to everything around us is family, not just to other human beings. In fact, Kumulipi you can find where we connect to places like Samoa, to Tonga and Aote. We can see genealogic. But this also goes on how we connect to the land, how we connect to the trees, how do we connect to water, how do we connect to all life form, even to the stardust itself. Talks about mana, which we'll talk about sure. Yeah, this power, this energy, this spiritual power, physical power that we all carry, this life force, if you will, that we all have. Tells us where we come from, yeah, how we got here, who we are today. Most importantly, how we relate, and even things like what is pono, what is it to live righteous, what is our morals, what is it to be a good human being, a productive human being. All this can be found in Kumulipo. And I'm going to stop here, and then we'll come back for section 2. We'll actually get right into the Kumulipo. So that's the background of the Kumulipo.